When you're shooting landscape photography, do you still need to use a graduated neutral density filter, or can you do it all in the computer? Let's talk about it on today's episode of
Ask David Bergman.
Hey there everybody, welcome back. Here I am, as always, answering your photography questions right here on Adorama TV. Don't forget, you can send in your own photo questions by going to askdavidbergman.com. Submit that form right there on the site. I just might pick your question to answer right here on a future show. Today's question was sent in by Pete R, and he wants to know, in today's digital world, is it still necessary to use graduated neutral density filters for landscape photography? Thanks, Pete, for sending in that question. You may have noticed I am not in my New York City studio. This is quite a different location. I am in the Arctic Circle. I'm north of the Arctic Circle in the Lofoten Islands in northern Norway. I'm actually attending a photo workshop. I teach workshops myself, but never stop learning, never stop growing as a photographer. I always take the opportunity to learn new things whenever I can. I'm here with Dave Williams and Kirsten Lutz to learn how to shoot the Northern Lights. I'd never seen the Northern Lights. We've been here all week and I've seen them and made some pictures, and it's been amazing. If you get the opportunity, Dave is the guy who wrote the book on photographing the Northern Lights. I'll put a link to his workshops below if you get a chance to come up here and join him and Kirsten. It's an amazing workshop. We've got Viking models and we're doing landscapes and the Northern Lights all evening, and it's really a cool experience. Definitely one for everybody to try at some point in their life. But I took taking this opportunity to talk about landscape photography because Pete had sent in this question. I really do appreciate it. I don't shoot a lot of landscapes, but people who do oftentimes use filters. There's different filters you can use, polarizers. Neutral density filters are one of those filters that you do use quite often when you're doing landscapes. Now, the traditional neutral density filter, the reason you use that, all an ND filter is that it's a filter that you put on your lens that blocks some light from hitting your camera sensor. It darkens your image. It's like sunglasses for your camera. Why would you do that? The main reason is to lengthen your shutter speed. You get to the point where you've lowered your ISO as much as you can, you've closed down your aperture as much as you can, and you've slowed down your shutter speed. But if you want to do those very long exposures, like 30 seconds and 1 minute exposures, 2 minute exposures, if you're doing, usually the common subject for that is water. If you have a waterfall or moving water with waves and things, if you do a very long exposure, it smooths out that water, and it's a very cool effect when you do those 1 minute, 2 minute, or longer exposures. So I've done some of those this week. It looks very cool. It's a fun thing to do. That's by using a traditional neutral density filter. But Pete asked about a graduated neutral ND. Sometimes you just call it a grad ND. And what a grad ND is it's a filter that is neutral density only on part of the filter, not the entire filter. So usually it's a line that graduates from an ND to clear, and so only part of the image is going to be blocked by some of that ND. So why would you do that? Well, let's look at a scene like this. I'm out here and I'm doing this reflection photograph where we've got the sky, we've got some light hitting the water and some mountains in the background. It's a gorgeous scene. If I just shoot this normally, let's take a look here. I'm using my Canon R3. I've got the 15 to 35 millimeter lens. I'm at 100 ISO. 7.1 is the aperture I've chosen. I like to shoot around there. That's the sweet spot of this lens. It's really the highest quality point of this lens. If you're shooting a lens, usually they say it's about 2 to 3 stops from wide open. This is a 2.8 lens, so at 4, 5, 6, 7.1 is about 2 and 2/3 of a stop from wide open. So that's really the sweet spot of this lens. It's just where I like to shoot if I have the opportunity. So I'm at 100 ISO, f7.1, and my shutter speed on this, in this case, is about 1/4 of a second. That's roughly what I'm going to be shooting at here, and that's the lower part of the frame looks really good. Let's take a picture. I'm on a 2-second timer so that I don't have to touch the camera when it's shooting, just so there's no motion. And you can see how that looks. The lower part of the image looks pretty good. However, the sky is blown out. Right? It's an overcast day. We don't have a gorgeous blue sky, but I'd like to still make a picture here. It could be really dramatic and really cool, but that sky is way too bright. It just has to do with the dynamic range of the picture, the very bright sky and the very dark mountains and how much darker the water is. It's hard to get all of that in one picture. So how do you deal with that? Well, you could do it digitally, and I'll talk about the pros and cons of that in a minute, where you work on it in the computer and bring some of it, lighten some of it and darken some of it. But in the old days, in the film days, we used graduated neutral NDs. And let me show you what that looks like. Right here, I have, in this old leathery box here, a grad ND. So what this is, filters, you know, by the way, come in two different types. There are circular filters and there are rectangular filters. The circular filters you screw right onto the lens. These rectangulars are made for, you buy a little adapter to put on the front of your lens, and then you can buy all kinds of different, these are glass filters, and you slide them in. It allows you to stack multiple filters if you want. There are some advantages of this and there are some disadvantages. That's a different question. If somebody sends that in, maybe I'll answer that one. But I've got this grad ND on the rectangular. So what this is, again, is it's only dark. The neutral density part is at only half of this filter. And I can slide this in and slide it down. So let's put this in front of my lens here. And what I can do is, as I watch my live preview, is I can slide it over, and then when I get it, just so that the top part is dark, just when the bottom is starting to get dark, I've gone too far. So, and I can also change the rotation if I want to. In this case, I just want it straight because my horizon is flat. And now I've darkened down my sky, and I can go ahead and take a picture at the same exposure. And you can see how that looks, right? It's done. It's perfect right out of the camera. I don't have to do any digital manipulation to it. I've darkened that sky. This particular grad ND is a 3-stop. So that sky has been darkened 3 stops down from the rest of the image. And it's easy, it's done, and I don't have to worry about it, right? That is the way, that's how a grad ND works. Now, Pete asked about if they're still necessary in today's digital world. Let me talk about some of the pros and cons and why you might use one or you might not. First, let me go over some of the reasons to use it. Well, if you're still shooting film, you know, back in the old days of shooting film, if you shot slide film especially, you really didn't have the digital manipulation options that we have today. You weren't shooting raw files or anything like that. It was kind of what you see is what you get, especially with slide film. So you had to shoot a grad ND. If you had a very bright sky and a very dark foreground, or you know, the lower part of the image, you really had to do it that way, and it worked great, and that's how people shot. If you're shooting video, it's also, you also really want to get it right in camera as much as possible. You're not going to be, especially if you're moving the camera, you're not going to be doing that kind of digital manipulation probably. If you're shooting video, just use the grad ND. Now, another reason to use one is if you're shooting long exposures, right? If you're doing these very long 1 minute, 2 minute exposures, you could bracket those and manipulate it in the computer. However, that takes a lot of time, right? If you're doing 2 minute exposures and then you have to do 4 or 5 different exposures to get enough dynamic range, that's going to take a lot of time. That could take 20 minutes just to do one picture. And if the scene is changing, if the light is changing, you're not going to want to do that. So if you're shooting very long exposures, I think a grad ND is a good way to go because what you see is what you get. It's right in there in the camera. Also, if you're doing a time lapse where you're doing multiple frames like that and you just want every frame to be consistent and come out of the camera done, if you're doing one of those time lapses where it compiles it in the camera, then for sure that's how you want to do it because it'll darken that sky and you'll be done and ready to go. Also, you can see the image right away. When you're in the field, there's no guesswork, right? So I know, looking at my screen right now, I know it looks good, it's done. I don't have to, in my mind, figure out, okay, well, I have one dark exposure and one light exposure, and I know I can combine them. If you do a lot of that kind of work, maybe that works for you, but it's kind of nice to see it right here in the camera. I'm not 100% a purist. I'd like to get as many things right in camera as possible, but if there are better ways to do it, I'm going to do it that way as well. It is kind of fun to see the image, though, right in the camera as it's done. And really, there's less time in front of the computer, right? You can spend more time in the field working out here on location. If you like shooting landscapes, you probably enjoy being outside. So you don't want to be sitting in front of a computer all day long. So there is some benefit to spending more time out here, manipulating the picture, using filters, using tricks to do it in camera instead of spending all day long in front of the computer. So, those are some of the reasons I think for using a grad ND. Now, some of the reasons not to, the cons. Honestly, it's kind of a hassle. You've got extra gear here. These are delicate. They're fragile pieces of glass. You've got to travel with them very carefully. You've got to handle them carefully. Sometimes you're working in the dark if you're doing nighttime, although you wouldn't be using a grad ND at night. But sometimes it's just a hassle. And having a lot of extra gear, it's a bit of extra work. And so to not have all of that extra stuff, if you've got multiple filters, that's kind of nice. Also, with these grad NDs, and neutral densities in general, you're locked into one power setting. So if you're using a 1-stop, 2-stop, 3-stop, 10-stop, whatever kind of ND you're using, whether it's a grad or not, they sell them as single units, right? So as 1-stop, 2-stop, 3-stop, whatever, and you have to get multiple filters for each one. They do make variable ND filters. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of those. There's some loss in quality, especially at the far edges of those. You're really better off using a solid one if you can. But again, you have to buy them for each power strength that you want. So that's a bit of a hassle. There's also the cost of that. Multiple filters, if you want good ones, they're pricey. And because you don't want a color shift with these, the higher priced ones, the better quality ones are going to cost you some extra money. So there is that cost level. Now, if you shoot these, full-time landscape photographer and you're making fine art prints, it might be worth that cost to you. But if it's just a hobby and you want to do it every once in a while, maybe it's not. Also, I think the biggest reason is you do just have way more control in digital, right? When you're in the computer, you can sit down more carefully and you can work on the picture. Out here, like I said, it's kind of fun to get it right in camera, but having that control in the computer is kind of nice. The biggest thing about that is sometimes a grad ND, the grad NDs are the graduation from dark to light is in a straight line, pretty much, right? So it's gradual, obviously, but it's a straight line. So in a situation like this, it's not bad because I've got this horizon that's pretty straight. But if I was shooting a scene where I had a big mountain in the middle, right? Or two mountains on either side, that would be a problem because I'd have to darken the entire upper part of the frame and I couldn't just get the middle part of it without touching those mountains. So it's going to darken those mountains quite a bit. And if I'm doing a strong ND, a 10-stop or something, or 4 or 5 stops, that's going to be noticeable and the mountains are going to look weird because they're going to be a lot darker than they should be in that situation. So in the computer, you can be a little more selective with how you darken your sky, instead of just doing a straight line. So also you can do it a couple different ways. You can do it with a single raw file where you process it. If you don't have a huge jump in dynamic range where it's just a couple of stops, the raw file will have all that information. You could process one darker, one lighter, and combine them in post, or you can bracket. You can shoot multiple raw files and then have some really bright and some really dark and go that way. So how you work in the computer is up to you. There's a million different ways to do that, but you do have a lot more control in front of the computer than you do with a grad ND. So those are some of the pros and cons. What do you guys think? Do you shoot landscapes? Do you use a grad ND? Am I wrong for saying that I think you don't really need them anymore? I only brought this one out here, honestly, to shoot this video. I do not usually shoot with a grad ND. I do use a regular ND if I want those those super long exposures, but a grad ND, I don't think it's necessary in today's digital world. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. Remember, you can send in your own photo questions like Pete did by going to AskDavidBergman.com. If you're not already a subscriber to the Adorama YouTube channel, go ahead and click that button down below. Use the little bell icon. You'll be notified as soon as new photo shows come out all week long from myself and the other photo hosts right here on Adorama TV. I do appreciate you guys joining me out here in the Lofoten Islands. It's gorgeous. Hope you get a chance to come out here yourself. Either way, keep those questions coming. I'll have a new question answer right here next time on Ask David Bergman.